It was a bright afternoon on the California coast, where the air smelled of sea salt and sunscreen. The crowd had gathered at the beach for a charity event hosted by two of the world's most loved wrestling icons, The Rock and John Cena. They were there not as competitors, but as friends, standing side by side to support a fitness program for kids. Laughter, music, and camera flashes filled the air as people lined up for autographs and selfies. The Rock, wearing his usual wide smile, greeted everyone warmly, while John joked around with a group of kids doing push-ups near the stage. Everything felt light and joyful, but sometimes life changes in an instant, and that moment came quietly, so quietly that no one noticed it at first. At the far end of the pier, a girl waved her hands in a strange pattern. Some people thought she was just playing or recording a video. A few even laughed, assuming she was part of some TikTok trend. But The Rock's eyes caught something different. Her movements were desperate, her face pale, her eyes wide. She wasn't waving for fun. She was signaling for help. The Rock froze for a second, his instincts kicking in. He had seen fear before, real fear, and that's what he saw now. He turned toward John and said quietly, "Something's not right over there." John followed his gaze, squinting toward the pier. He saw her too. Without wasting a second, they both began moving, their long strides cutting through the sand. The crowd was still unaware. Cameras followed them, assuming they were just walking over for another photo op. But as the two men reached the start of the pier, the sound of the waves changed, something darker, heavier. And then they saw it. A small car was half submerged near the lower end of the pier, its front almost swallowed by the water. The girl stood nearby, drenched, trembling, shouting words that were drowned out by the ocean's roar. The Rock and John ran toward her. "What happened?" The Rock asked, trying to stay calm. "My mom, she's in the car." The girl cried out, her voice breaking. "I tried to open the door, but it's stuck." John didn't ask more questions. He tossed his phone to someone nearby and shouted, "Call 911." Then he jumped into the water without hesitation. The Rock followed right after him, the cold waves slamming against their legs. The car's windows were fogged, and the tide was creeping higher with every passing second. John pulled hard on the door handle, but it wouldn't move. The Rock slammed his shoulder against it, once, twice, but it didn't budge. The girl sobbed on the pier, covering her face. "Don't stop," The Rock shouted. "We can do this." John took a deep breath, dived under for a moment, and checked the lower frame. When he surfaced, he yelled, "It's jammed from the inside. Pressure's locking it." The Rock looked around quickly. He spotted a small metal pole that had broken off the pier. Grabbing it, he swung it against the window near the edge. The first hit cracked it, the second shattered it completely. Water rushed inside. John reached in through the shards, unbuckling the seatbelt, pulling the unconscious woman toward the opening. The Rock helped lift her up. Together, they carried her out of the water and laid her on the pier. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" John asked as he checked her breathing. Nothing. He immediately began CPR, counting out loud, pressing his hands rhythmically on her chest. The Rock supported her head, trying to clear her airway. The girl knelt beside them, her hands trembling, whispering prayers through tears. Come on," The Rock muttered. "Stay with us." After a few tense moments that felt like forever, the woman coughed. A rush of water spilled from her mouth, followed by a faint gasp. The Rock smiled in relief. The girl cried even harder, hugging her mother's wet arm. The small crowd that had gathered began to clap softly, some crying, others recording. Though The Rock quickly raised his hand and said, "No cameras, please. Let her breathe." John checked her pulse again and looked up with a small nod. "She's alive." By now, sirens could be heard in the distance. The paramedics were on their way. The Rock helped move the woman onto a drier part of the pier, while John covered her with a blanket someone handed him. The girl wouldn't let go of her mother's hand. The Rock crouched beside her and spoke softly. "You did great. You didn't give up." She shook her head, tears still rolling down. "Everyone thought I was just joking or filming. Nobody came. I didn't know what else to do, so I kept doing that hand signal I saw online. That was brave," The Rock said gently. "That signal saved your mom's life." John sat down beside them, soaked to the bone but calm. "Most people freeze when something like this happens," he said. "But you kept fighting. That's what heroes do." The girl managed a small smile through her tears. "You two are the real heroes," she whispered. The Rock chuckled softly. "We just ran toward where help was needed. You're the one who didn't stop asking for it." The ambulance finally arrived and the paramedics took over. The woman was conscious now but weak, her breathing shallow. They loaded her gently onto a stretcher. Before they left, the girl turned to The Rock and John, hugging them both tightly. "Thank you," she said again and again. As the sirens faded, the beach began to return to its normal rhythm, but something had changed. The people who had been filming earlier were now silent, some looking ashamed that they hadn't acted sooner. The Rock noticed and said quietly, "Next time, don't wait for someone famous to help. Be that person." The crowd nodded. Some clapped, not in excitement, but in respect. A few hours later, the event organizers tried to continue with the charity program, but the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't about lifting weights or selfies anymore. It was about what had just happened. Real courage, real teamwork, real humanity. When reporters later asked The Rock about it, he only said, "It wasn't heroism. It was instinct. That girl did everything right. We just showed up." John echoed the same feeling during an interview. "People think strength is about muscles or fame, but the strongest person I saw that day was a young girl who refused to give up." Later that evening, after the sun dipped below the ocean, The Rock and John stopped by the hospital quietly. They didn't tell anyone, not even their managers. They just wanted to check if the mother and daughter were okay. The nurse smiled when she saw them. "She's awake," she said softly, and asking for the men who helped her. They entered the small hospital room. The woman looked pale but better, her daughter sitting beside her holding her hand. When she saw them, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered weakly. "You already did," The Rock said kindly, "by fighting your way back." John added, "You two did everything right. You stayed strong for each other. That's what matters." The girl stood and hugged them again, tighter this time. It wasn't about celebrity or fame. It was about life. How fragile it could be and how kindness could make the difference between losing it and saving it. As they left the hospital, the night air was calm. The Rock looked at John and said quietly, "You know, people will turn this into headlines and hashtags." John smiled a little. "Let them. Maybe someone will read it and remember what to do when they see a signal like that." The Rock nodded. "Yeah. If even one person learns to look closer instead of assuming, it's worth it." They walked toward the parking lot, still wet from the earlier rescue. Neither spoke for a while, just listening to the quiet hum of the city around them. Sometimes real strength isn't about fame or power. It's about the moments when no one expects you to act, but you do anyway. It's about hearing a silent call for help and running toward it instead of away. And that day on the pier, that's exactly what happened. Two men known for their strength showed the world that the greatest kind of power isn't physical, it's human. After that dramatic afternoon on the pier, things began to return to normal on the surface. But deep down, something had changed for everyone who had been there, especially for the girl whose courage saved her mother's life. The Rock and John had returned to their schedules, but the image of that trembling hand sending an SOS signal stayed with them. It was one of those moments that reminds you that being strong isn't about lifting weights. It's about noticing when someone else is breaking. A few days later, The Rock received a call from the hospital where the mother was being treated. The nurse said both mother and daughter wanted to thank him and John in person before they were discharged. Without any hesitation, he cleared a few hours and called John. They agreed to go together quietly, no media, no cameras. Just two men visiting a family that had gone through something terrifying. When they arrived, the hospital staff smiled warmly. The girl was standing outside the room, her hair tied back, holding a small gift bag. When she saw them, her eyes lit up. She ran forward and hugged both men tightly. "You came back," she said softly. "Of course we did," The Rock replied, smiling. "We wanted to see how your mom's doing." "She's awake now," the girl said. "She's still weak, but she's getting better. She keeps saying she wants to meet her heroes again." John chuckled lightly. "We're not heroes, kiddo. We just did what anyone should do." But the truth was, not everyone would have done it. And that's why the moment had touched so many hearts. Inside the room, the woman lay resting. She looked fragile but peaceful. When she saw them, she tried to sit up, her eyes filling with tears. "You two, you saved me," she whispered. The Rock stepped closer, shaking his head. "No, ma'am. Your daughter saved you. We just helped her finish what she started." The girl smiled shyly, her eyes glistening. Her mother took her hand. I taught her to be brave, she said, but I never thought she'd have to use it like that. The room went quiet for a moment. The only sound was the slow, steady beep of the heart monitor. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt heavy. It was peaceful, filled with quiet gratitude. The Rock took a deep breath and said softly, "You know, I keep thinking about that day. So many people were right there and no one noticed you. We live in a world full of eyes, but not enough people really see." John nodded in agreement. People are always looking at their screens, waiting for someone else to act. But that day you didn't wait. You sent a signal. And that's what made the difference. The girl's mother smiled faintly. "Maybe this happened for a reason," she said. "Maybe it's a reminder for all of us." Before leaving, the Rock promised to stay in touch. "If you ever need anything, you call us. You're part of our story now." They took a photo together, not for the internet, but just for memory. A simple picture, 3 faces smiling, one moment frozen in time. When they left the hospital, the sun was beginning to set. The air felt softer somehow. John looked at the Rock and said, "You know, we should do something more about this. There are so many people out there who wouldn't know what that SOS signal even means." The Rock nodded. "Yeah, we should teach them. Awareness can save lives." They spent the next few weeks planning quietly. No big PR campaign, no flashy promotions, just a simple idea. They wanted to start an awareness movement about emergency signals and how to recognize them. They talked to schools, local community centers, and even made a few short videos showing how to respond when someone sends a distress signal. The girl and her mother became part of it too. In one of the videos, the girl shared her story in her own words. Her voice was calm but powerful. "I thought nobody would come," she said. "But they did. If you see someone asking for help, don't wait to be sure. Just check. That could be the difference between life and death." The video spread quickly. People all over the country shared it, touched by her honesty. It wasn't just about celebrities, it was about human connection. A few weeks later, The Rock and John were invited to a community event where the girl was being honored for her bravery. The small auditorium was packed with people, students, parents, firefighters, and volunteers. When the girl walked on stage, the crowd stood up and clapped. She looked nervous but happy. The host asked her, "What did you feel when no one believed you that day?" The girl took a deep breath before answering. "It hurt. I felt invisible for a while. But then I realized something. Sometimes you have to keep sending the signal until the right person sees it. And when they do, it changes everything." The Rock and John were sitting in the front row, clapping proudly. They didn't speak that day. They didn't need to. Her words said everything. After the ceremony, The Rock walked up to her and said, "You're not invisible anymore. You're a voice for people who can't shout loud enough." She smiled. "Because you listened." It was a moment that neither of them would forget. Over the next few months, the awareness campaign grew. People started sharing their own stories. Stories of times they ignored cries for help and wished they hadn't, and stories of moments they stepped up. Schools began including SOS awareness and safety training sessions. It became something real, something that could truly save lives. But even with all the attention, The Rock and John stayed humble. Whenever reporters tried to turn it into a publicity story, they redirected the focus. "It's not about us," they'd say. "It's about what anyone can do if they just care enough to act." One evening, several months later, The Rock was sitting on his porch, scrolling through messages. Among the usual fan notes, one message stood out. It was from a young boy in Texas who wrote, "I saw your video about helping others. Last week I helped a man who fainted in the park. I remembered what you said, don't wait, just help. He's okay now, thank you." The Rock read it twice, smiling softly. He forwarded it to John, who replied almost instantly, "That's what it's all about." They never planned for their good deed to turn into a movement, but sometimes life works that way. One brave act creates a ripple, and that ripple touches more lives than you could ever imagine. A few months later, they visited the same beach where everything had happened. It was quiet that day, just the sound of the waves and the laughter of a few kids building sandcastles nearby. The pier had been repaired, and there was now a small sign that read, "In honor of courage. Always look, always listen." The Rock stood there for a moment, staring at the sign. "Feels different, doesn't it?" he said. John nodded slowly. "Yeah, that day changed more than one life." They both smiled quietly. Sometimes words weren't needed. The girl and her mother arrived a few minutes later. They had invited them to visit the place again, not for cameras, but just for closure. The girl walked to the edge of the pier, looking down at the calm water. "It doesn't scare me anymore," she said softly. Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "Because you turned fear into strength." The rock smiled at them. "And that's something even we can learn from." As they all stood there watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, there was no crowd, no noise, no spotlight. Just people connected by one moment that had changed their lives. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones made for fame. They're the ones that remind us what it means to be human, to see, to care, to act. That day on the pier had started with panic and fear, but it ended with hope. And that hope kept spreading, one person at a time. The world didn't need another superhero that day, it just needed people who were willing to pay attention. And that's exactly what The Rock, John, and a brave young girl did. Several months had passed since that unforgettable day on the pier. The news had faded, the headlines had moved on, and the world was back to its usual rhythm. But for those who lived through it, the memory remained sharp and warm, like sunlight after a storm. The girl had become stronger, more confident, and her mother had fully recovered. Life had given them a second chance, and they weren't going to waste it. The Rock and John had returned to their busy lives, shooting movies, attending charity events, and meeting fans across the world. But the lesson from that day followed them everywhere. They often spoke about it in interviews, not to remind people of their heroism, but to remind everyone how small actions could save lives. Every time they mentioned it, the girl's courage was what they praised first. One morning, while The Rock was on set filming, his assistant handed him a letter. It was from the same girl. The handwriting was neat but young, and the words were full of honesty. She wrote about how her mother was doing better now, how she had started giving short talks at schools about safety and awareness, and how she wanted to thank them again for changing her life. At the bottom of the letter, she had added a small line. "If possible, I'd love to meet again someday, not at a hospital, but to show you what we've started." The Rock smiled after reading it. Later that evening, he called John. "Remember that brave kid?" He asked. "How could I forget?" John replied. "She wants us to visit her school," The Rock said. "She started something big." John didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." A week later, they both traveled quietly to the small town where she lived. They didn't tell the media, and they didn't want any publicity. This wasn't a show, it was something real. When they arrived, the school staff greeted them with excitement. The principal shook their hands and said, "She's been waiting for this day. You two inspired something beautiful here." They walked into the school auditorium, which was decorated with colorful posters and banners that read, "Be the One Who Helps" and SOS Awareness Week. Turned out the girl had started a small campaign in her school to teach students what to do in emergencies. She had even convinced the local fire department to participate and train the students in basic rescue signals. When she walked onto the stage and saw them sitting in the front row, her face lit up. She covered her mouth in surprise, her eyes filling with tears. "You came," she said, almost whispering. The Rock smiled warmly. "Of course. We promised, didn't we?" John waved and said, "We wouldn't miss this for the world." The audience clapped as she walked to the podium, still stunned but smiling. She started speaking slowly, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with every sentence. "A few months ago," she began, "I thought no one could see me. I was waving for help and people just kept walking by. But then two people noticed. They saw something that everyone else missed, and because of that, my mom is alive today." The room went completely silent. Even the teachers looked emotional. She continued, "That day taught me that we all have a choice. We can ignore what's around us or we can pay attention. I don't ever want someone else to feel invisible. So I started this campaign to teach others how to recognize SOS signals and how to act quickly." The students clapped loudly, cheering for her bravery. The Rock leaned over to John and whispered, "She's turning into a leader." John nodded, smiling proudly. And all she needed was someone to believe her. After the event ended, the girl and her mother came to greet them. The mother hugged them both tightly. "You two started this," she said with gratitude. The Rock shook his head. "No, you two did. We just followed your lead." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking with students, answering their questions, and sharing small lessons about courage, teamwork, and kindness. One boy raised his hand and asked, "How do you know when someone really needs help?" John replied thoughtfully, When you're not sure, that's when you should check. It's better to ask and be wrong than to walk away and be sorry later. The Rock added, "Your eyes can see, but your heart needs to pay attention too. That's what makes the difference." As they left the school, the crowd of students followed them out, waving goodbye. The girl ran after them and handed the Rock a small handmade card. On the front it said, "You helped me find my voice." Inside it read, "Now I want to help others be heard." The Rock kept that card in his jacket pocket for months after that day. In the following weeks, the story of the school project spread across the internet again. But this time it wasn't about celebrities or rescue stories, it was about a movement. People from other schools started doing the same thing, holding awareness weeks, teaching about safety and promoting compassion. Even police and firefighters joined in. The Rock and John received letters from all over the world, from teachers, parents, and children who said the story inspired them to act differently. One note came from a woman who wrote, "I used to ignore people on the streets thinking it wasn't my business. But after hearing about that girl, I stopped and helped a stranger who had collapsed. That moment changed me forever." Those messages reminded them that small acts could echo in ways no one could predict. Months later, the Rock and John were invited to a large youth convention. They hadn't planned to attend, but when they heard that the girl and her mother would be speaking there, they agreed to go. The event was huge. Thousands of people gathered to celebrate stories of courage and kindness. When it was their turn, the Rock walked on stage, his deep voice calm but emotional. "That day on the pier wasn't about fame," he said. "It wasn't about being strong. It was about being human. We just saw a girl trying to save her mother. That moment reminded us that everyone has the power to help no matter who you are." John added, "You don't need a camera or a stage. You just need a heart that listens and hands that act." When the girl came on stage next, the audience erupted in applause. She stood between the two men who once pulled her mother from the water, now confident and brave. "They saved my mom's life," she said softly. "But what they really did was teach me that no one is ever too small to make a difference." Tears filled her mother's eyes as she watched from the front row. The moment was powerful not because of fame, but because of truth, a reminder that kindness still matters. After the event ended, the Rock and John stayed for a while, meeting kids who came up to them with stories of their own. One little girl said, "I learned the SOS signal because of you." Another said, "I want to help people too when I grow up." Each word touched them deeply. That night, back at their hotel, the Rock sat by the window, looking at the city lights. "Funny," he said quietly, "how one moment can change everything." John nodded. "Yeah, it started with one signal and turned into something the whole world heard." The Rock smiled. "That's the kind of impact worth having." Neither of them could have predicted that a simple act of paying attention would inspire thousands of people to care more, look closer, and act faster. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't planned. It was real life, raw and unfiltered. The girl had gone from being unseen to becoming a symbol of courage, and the two men who noticed her had reminded the world that compassion is the truest form of strength. Months later, as life moved on, the pier where it all began became a quiet landmark. Tourists visited, children played, and families walked along it peacefully. On one corner there was a small plaque that read, "For those who see what others ignore, for those who act when it matters most." Every time the Rock or John passed through California, they made a quiet stop there. They didn't make a scene. They just stood for a moment looking out at the water, remembering the day that forever changed how they saw the world. And somewhere, maybe on another shore, someone was learning to send an SOS signal, not knowing that years ago, one girl's trembling hands had started something that would go on to save many others. Because sometimes heroes aren't made in the spotlight. They're made in the quiet moments when they choose to care. Weeks had passed since the school event, but the story of the girl and her mother continued to ripple quietly across the community. People often asked The Rock and John Cena if they felt proud of what they did, but both men would always shake their heads. They didn't see it as something extraordinary. What had happened on that pier, they would say, was just being human. Still, everywhere they went, people shared how the girl's courage inspired them to pay attention, act fast, and care more. One afternoon, The Rock received a phone call from the girl herself. Her voice was excited, almost bursting with energy. "We've started a community safety program," she said. "I want you and John to come see it." Without hesitation, he called John and the two agreed to visit. This time, they weren't just going to schools. The program had grown to include neighborhood workshops, local parks, and even the nearby fire station. Volunteers had joined in, including teenagers who had learned first aid and safety tips. When they arrived, the girl ran toward them, waving frantically. Her smile was brighter than ever, and her excitement was contagious. "You're here! Come see what we've built," she shouted. They followed her to a large tent set up in the park. Inside, tables were lined with pamphlets about emergency signals, first aid kits, and step-by-step instructions on how to respond to distress situations. Children were practicing hand signals, learning how to recognize SOS gestures and how to call for help quickly. Parents watched, some taking notes, others smiling proudly at their children. The Rock knelt down to speak to a small group of kids. "You see," he said, "being strong isn't just about muscles. It's about noticing when someone needs help and acting. That's true strength." John moved to another group, helping them practice how to help someone who had fainted or gotten hurt. "Remember," he said, "even if it's scary, you can make a difference. Don't wait for someone else. Be the one who acts." The girl walked between the groups, guiding children, answering questions, and giving gentle encouragement. It was amazing to see her confidence, the way she had turned her fear from that day on the pier into courage that could teach others. After a while, the girl led the Rock and John to a small booth she had made especially for them. It had pictures from that day: the pier, the waves, the car, the moment they rescued her mother. She looked up at them and said softly, "I wanted you to see this because you made it all possible." The Rock smiled. "You made it possible. We just happened to be there." John nodded. "Exactly. The real hero is you." She shook her head, smiling. "No, you were brave too. You acted when no one else did." The volunteers had prepared a short demonstration for them. A young boy pretended to be trapped in a small structure, while a girl signaled SOS nearby. The other children jumped into action, showing how they had learned to respond. The Rock and John watched carefully, impressed by how seriously the children took the training. After the demonstration, the girl gathered everyone for a brief talk. "What happened to me and my mom taught me one thing," she said. "Every second counts. Every gesture matters. You don't know who is waiting for someone to help them. Maybe that person is your neighbor, your friend, or even a stranger. When you see someone in trouble, act. Don't wait. That's all I want to say." The crowd clapped, and for a moment everyone was silent, thinking about her words. It wasn't just training anymore. It was a message, a philosophy about caring for others. Later, the Rock and John sat on a bench near the edge of the park, watching the kids play and practice safety drills. The sun was low in the sky, casting golden light over the scene. "You know," the Rock said quietly, "I didn't realize it would grow like this. One day on a pier and now a whole program teaching kids how to be aware and act." John nodded. "It's amazing. And it started with someone who refused to stay silent. That's all it took." As they sat there, the girl ran up again. "Can I show you something?" she asked, holding a small notebook. Inside, she had drawn diagrams of different emergency signals, written simple steps for how to help someone, and even included tips on staying calm during scary situations. The Rock flipped through the pages, impressed. "This is incredible. You've really put your heart into this." The girl grinned. "I want everyone to have a chance like my mom and I did. I don't want anyone to feel like no one will notice them." John smiled. "That's exactly why you're making a difference." Later that evening, they held a small community meeting. Parents, teachers, and local officials gathered to hear about the program. The girl spoke first, explaining why awareness and quick action mattered. She shared her personal story, carefully avoiding anything frightening, focusing instead on courage, observation, and action. One mother spoke up afterward. "My children learned more from your story in this program than from anything else. It makes me realize how important it is to pay attention, even in small ways." The girl smiled at her. "Exactly. It's the small actions that add up." The Rock and John spoke briefly as well. "It's not about fame or strength," the Rock said. "It's about humanity. You never know when someone's life depends on what you do, or even just that you see them." John added, "And every person here today can make a difference. We just need to care enough to act." After the meeting, the girl and her mother walked with them to the edge of the park. "I can't believe how many people this has touched," the mother said softly. All because of that day on the pier. The Rock shook his head. It's not just because of us. It's because of you. You refuse to give up. You refuse to be ignored. The girl smiled, but her eyes reflected deep thought. I still remember how scared I was, she admitted. I thought nobody would help, but now, I know I can make others feel seen. John put a hand on her shoulder. That's what courage looks like. You took something scary and turned it into hope for many. That night as they drove back to the city, The Rock and John reflected on the day. It wasn't about headlines, cameras, or applause. It was about watching someone grow from fear into strength, seeing them lead others, and realizing that small acts of attention and care could become movements that change lives. Weeks later, the girls' program had grown even further. Other schools and community centers contacted her to replicate the workshops. Children were learning emergency signs, parents were learning how to act quickly, and entire neighborhoods were becoming safer because someone decided to pay attention. The Rock and John stayed involved quietly, offering guidance when needed, sending supplies for the workshops, and continuing to remind everyone that real power lies in caring for others. One evening, The Rock received a video from the girl. She was teaching younger children how to send SOS signals, her voice confident and clear. You don't have to be big to be brave, she said. All you need is to notice and act. That's it. He forwarded the video to John with a single line. She's changing the world. John replied almost immediately, and it started with a hand signal. They both smiled, knowing that moments of real humanity, seeing, caring, acting, could ripple far beyond what anyone imagined. Sometimes, the most important hero isn't the one with the strongest muscles or the biggest fame. Sometimes it's the person who refuses to stay silent, who sends a signal, and who inspires others to do the same. And for this girl, The Rock and John Cena, that lesson wasn't just something to remember. It was something to live, teach, and share with the world. The sun set over the city that night, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The park was quiet now, but the energy of that day, the courage and the hope lingered. And somewhere in another school, another child would see that message, hear the lesson, and act when it mattered most, just like the girl on the pier who refused to give up. It was proof that the simplest acts, paying attention, noticing someone's fear, responding with care, could grow into something extraordinary. And that was just the beginning. The months after the community safety program had begun were filled with quiet, steady progress. The girl and her mother were now well known in their local town, not for fame but for courage, perseverance, and the power to inspire others. Children practiced emergency signals at home and in school. Parents learned how to respond calmly in dangerous situations, and neighborhoods felt safer because someone had taken notice. The girl often told visitors, "It started with just me standing there trying to be seen." The Rock and John Cena continued to quietly support the program. They sent supplies for workshops, attended small events when they could, and spoke whenever asked, not to take credit, but to highlight the real hero, the girl who had refused to give up that day on the pier. They never wanted the attention for themselves. To them, it was about teaching others to care. One morning, they received an invitation from the city mayor. The local government wanted to recognize the girl, her mother, and everyone involved in the safety campaign for their bravery and community service. The Rock and John decided to accompany her to the ceremony, keeping it simple and heartfelt. When they arrived at the city hall, the girl was nervous but excited. She wore a neat dress, her hair tied back, and clutched a small notebook full of ideas, notes, and diagrams she had drawn over the months. The mayor stepped up to the podium, praising the girl for her courage, determination, and commitment to teaching others. The room was filled with applause, and the girl's mother wiped tears from her eyes. When it was her turn to speak, the girl's voice trembled at first. "I never thought my small action that day would grow into something so big," she said. "I just wanted to save my mom. But now I see that noticing, caring, and acting can change lives. You don't have to be famous or strong to make a difference. You just have to pay attention and try." The audience was silent, absorbing her words. The Rock and John looked at each other, proud, knowing that she had turned fear into hope and hope into action that could continue to ripple across the world. After the ceremony, reporters crowded around them, but both men kept the focus on the girl and her message. She showed what bravery really looks like, The Rock said. It isn't muscles or fame when it's caring enough to notice when someone needs help. John added, the strongest people are those who act, even when it's scary. This girl is stronger than most of us could ever hope to be. The girl smiled shyly, humbled by the attention. She didn't see herself as famous. She just knew she had made a difference. Her mother hugged her tightly. I'm proud of you, she whispered. You turned fear into courage and courage into a movement. Weeks passed and the campaign continued to grow. Schools in other cities began reaching out, asking to replicate the workshops. Neighborhoods wanted safety kits, instructions, and volunteer guides. The Rock and John helped coordinate some of these efforts from a distance, sending letters, recording short video messages, and offering advice based on what had worked in their community. One afternoon, The Rock received a video from the girl. She was teaching a group of children how to recognize different SOS signals and how to respond calmly. When you see someone in trouble, she said, don't wait, act. Even a small action can save a life. The Rock forwarded the video to John. She's unstoppable, he typed. John replied, and it all started with a hand signal. That's the power of one person refusing to give up. Months later, the girl's story began to reach farther than they had imagined. A major national news outlet wanted to feature her, not as a celebrity story, but as an example of community courage. They highlighted how she, with the help of 2 attentive adults, had inspired an entire movement teaching children and adults how to act in emergencies. The Rock and John stayed in the background. They didn't want the spotlight. For them, it wasn't about recognition. They had acted that day because it was right, and they wanted others to see that anyone could do the same. Meanwhile, the girl and her mother continued their visits to schools and local events. Children looked up to the girl as a real-life example of bravery and compassion. Her words were simple but powerful. Notice, care, act. She explained that courage doesn't mean never being scared. It means acting even when you are. One evening, The Rock and John visited the girl and her mother at their home. They sat together in the backyard, enjoying the calm night air. The girl showed them a scrapbook filled with drawings, thank you notes from students, and letters from people who had been inspired to act after learning her story. This is incredible, The Rock said. You've touched so many lives, the girl shrugged. I just did what I had to. I didn't want anyone else to feel alone like I did that day. John smiled. And because you acted, you taught all of us a lesson. Life is fragile. Courage is contagious. The mother looked at them both. I can't thank you enough. You saved my life. You showed me that people still care. The Rock shook his head gently. You and your daughter saved each other. We just helped. The girl and her mother smiled, knowing the truth in his words. Their bond was stronger than ever, built on love, trust, and the knowledge that they had faced fear together and emerged stronger. In the following months, the girls' program spread to nearby towns. Teachers reported students paying closer attention to their friends, looking out for each other, and practicing emergency skills. Parents noticed that children were more confident and aware, and even strangers began helping strangers more often. One day, The Rock and John were invited to a large national conference on youth safety and community awareness. The girl was the keynote speaker. She walked on stage confidently, speaking to thousands of people about her experience and what it had taught her. When I first sent that SOS signal, she began, I was scared. I didn't know if anyone would see me. But 2 men noticed. They didn't hesitate to act. That day taught me that small actions matter. Each one of us has the power to change someone's life if we just care enough to pay attention. The audience erupted in applause. Many people were moved to tears. The Rock and John watched from the front row, silently proud. After the speech, reporters swarmed the girl, asking her questions, but she always brought the focus back to the message, paying attention, caring, and acting. She didn't need fame. She needed to teach others how to make a difference. That night, as they returned home, The Rock and John reflected on the journey. It's incredible, The Rock said, how one day, one signal, and one brave kid changed so many lives. John nodded. It reminds me that heroes aren't always the ones on stage or in the spotlight. Sometimes they're the ones who stand their ground when no one is watching and refuse to give up. Weeks turned into months, and the girls' program became recognized nationally. Awards and honors followed, but she remained humble. She didn't see herself as extraordinary. She just knew she had to act when someone's life depended on it. One quiet evening, The Rock visited the pier where it all began. The waves were calm, the sun setting in the distance. He thought about the day he saw her signal for help, how quickly everything had changed, and how much courage it had taken for her to act. John joined him, and together they stood in silence, looking out at the water. The girl's courage had created a ripple that went far beyond anyone's imagination. It wasn't just about saving one life anymore. It was about teaching thousands of others the importance of noticing, caring, and acting. The girl's mother later joined them at the pier, holding her daughter's hand. "You two taught her what courage looks like," she said softly. The Rock smiled. "She had it all along. We just helped her see it." The girl looked at them, her eyes shining. "And you helped me believe that even one person can make a difference." The sun disappeared behind the horizon, leaving shades of gold and orange in the sky. The pier was quiet, but the lessons of that day, courage, attention, and action, lingered in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed them. That day, that one act of noticing and caring had grown into something much larger than any of them could have imagined. And the message was clear. True strength is not about fame, power, or muscles. It's about being human, seeing when someone needs help, and acting without hesitation. The Rock and John Cena walked away from the pier that evening knowing that the girl's story, her bravery, and her persistence would continue to inspire generations. A single hand signal had changed everything, proving that anyone, no matter their age, can make a difference in the world. And sometimes, that is the most powerful story of all.